This is Viz, and today our guest is Bart Sibrel. Documentary filmmaker has focused much of his work on whether or not there was a moon landing. We're going to probably talk most centrally about a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, but he has other titles on his website as well. We want to give that to you now. It's moonmovie.com. And once again, we're with Bart Sibrel. Bart, thanks for visiting the Grassy Knoll.
Oh, good to be here.
All right,
Look out for that guy behind the fence.
Yeah, we all have something in common, don't we? We get mysteries. The name of that show is done kind of tongue-in-cheekly by my partner, who doesn't join me anymore. But and sometimes I wonder if that gives us problems when we try to get guests on. But we, that may be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but what we do is obviously sometimes deadly serious. And as the case is now, you've chosen what you've called a moon hoax, whether or not there was a moon landing, as something very central to the work you do. What about that whole moon episode moved you?
Well, as a kid, I was a big fan, actually, of the moon landings. I had a bedroom wall that was entirely covered with pictures of the first moon landing. My dad was in the Air Force, and he got, kind of as an officer's complimentary gift packet from NASA or whatever, he gave it to me. And so for years, from the age of 8 to 14, I grew up looking at the moon landing 365 days a year. It was covered my bedroom wall. Then I turned 14, and I'm watching a television program, an early news magazine program that had on it a guest of a gentleman who worked for a contractor of NASA during the 1960s, during the development of the Apollo rocket. And he asserted quite confidently that the moon missions were, number one, impossible, and then number two, falsified in order to fool the Soviet Union about strategic capability during the Cold War. And I, was 14 years old, open-minded, and I thought, well, never thought about that. And I went to the bedroom wall, and sure enough, I saw things in the pictures that were right in front of me that I'd never seen before because I wasn't looking for them. It was like my eyes were wide shut. There, all this information would stare me in the face, but because I didn't have the inkling to look for something, I didn't find it for years and years and years. I'd say that's kind of the state of most of the American people today. And 10 years later, 24 years old, I've become a filmmaker. And I have a production company, and I do editing services, and I'm editing for the gentleman who actually produced that television program 10 years earlier. And I'm like, do you remember the guy who was on your program 10 years ago, said we didn't go to the moon? He's like, no, but call this office. And I called them. They said they were 2 days away from deleting all 10-year-old files. So he suggests that I do a film about it, and I start the film under the idea of the theory that the moon landings might be fraudulent. I figure, conservatively, there was about a 1 out of 4 chance that they were fake. Largely because the Soviets were so much more advanced. They had launched the first satellite, the first animal, the first man, the first woman, the first spacewalk, the first crew of 3, the first of 2 spacecraft simultaneously. At that point in history, for every 20 hours the U.S. spent in space, they spent 100 hours in space. I mean, just a phenomenal advancement over the United States. And it was like a poker game, where I've got 2 2s, you've got 3 3s, and I bet $500,000 to get you to back off. And the theory was at that time that they faked the moon landing in order to appear as if we were as strong or stronger than the Soviet missile and technological capability. Well, the film, involves a bunch of research because I want to do it correctly. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. So I spent about 5 years producing this 47-minute film, and you can see excerpts of it at moonmovie.com. And about 3.5 years into the film, I discovered this footage, unedited footage, that no one had ever seen before. And, to my surprise, they're faking a shot of the Apollo 11 mission. Neil Armstrong's on camera, Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin's on camera, and they're faking one shot of the moon mission. And it's dated 2 and 3 days after they left to go to the moon. And you realize, oh my God, they really didn't go. When you see this footage, which is in the movie, and you can also see a small clip of it at moonmovie.com, you realize that, oh my God, the old guy was right. They really didn't go to the moon. And at that point, 3.5 years into the 5-year project, I realized this is not a theory. This is a fact. They did not go to the moon. I mean, you have to wonder. You know, Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1928. Would it be 50 years before someone flew across the Atlantic again? What they're saying is they went to the moon in 1969, where the whole rocket had less computing power than my watch that I bought for $20 at Walmart. And they're saying it's going to take a half a century before they can, quote, return to the moon. That really is illogical. I mean, the space shuttle only goes 200 miles above the Earth, and it's killed 14 people. And yet they're saying they went 100,000% farther than that, a third of a century ago, 6 times, landing on another world, and never killed anybody. When you start thinking about the history of flight, the moon landings are the statistical anomaly in the history of spaceflight that they can't even duplicate possibly a half a century later. It really defies logic. And because it involves such, emotions, pride, and, the Vietnam War was going on at the time. Might I add, Nixon was president at the time. And this was a great pep rally, to say something positive about America. Yeah, we got that war killing all these people, and we don't know whether we should be in this foreign country or not. Let's give them something to cheer about, that the U.S. wins something. And we had no reason to doubt that they were fake, and they certainly could orbit the Earth. However, the facts prove that they did not leave Earth orbit, that they were on the rocket, but they never left Earth orbit for 8 days, and they splashed back down, and no one was the wiser. I mean, one of the best questions is, well, how could you fool, the 100,000 people involved in it? And that's what I asked. But then I realized that very few people knew the actual top of the pyramid. It was so departmentalized. You had the person making the glove and the door and the boot. And they certainly were on the rocket, and they did achieve Earth orbit, which is no small accomplishment even today. However, once they were into Earth orbit, there were only 3 eyewitnesses and a television picture completely controlled by the government. And NASA did not know, in my opinion, NASA did not know that the moon landings were fake. I think 99.99% people at NASA really believed the moon landings were real. The flight director of the Apollo 11 moon mission only admitted a year and a half ago that the ground crew could tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and an actual flight. They thought they were going to the moon, and better for secrecy to get everyone to believe it. And you realize that it could actually be done with just a handful of people knowing. The astronauts certainly knew, Von Braun, the flight director, knew, a couple of computer programmers at NASA knew, and then everyone else. The sets and all that were built, in strict, controlled, top secret facilities where you sign away your rights, to ever talk about it or you're executed. So the whole thing could have been done with only 100 people knowing. And now that the Cold War's over, it's like they could admit if they wanted to that the moon landings were fake, but then that would jeopardize their control, because the public would ask, well, what else? What dramatic, other dramatic lies have you told us? So they're afraid to come clean about it because it might reveal their habitual nature to lie to the public.
So what this all means to you, and you hope for those who view the documentary, that if this is all a lie, then what is necessarily our relationship to this day with our government?
Well, we open the film, with quotes of famous people, and we end the film with quotes of famous people having to do with lies and deception. And at the end of the film, we have a quote up by George Orwell, a very forward-thinking person of his time. And he said, "Whoever controls the past controls the future." Well, what is the past? That's the historical record of things. Right now, the encyclopedia says we landed on the moon. Right?
Okay.
And whoever controls that point of view in the past is also controlling our future. Well, that's, whoever's in charge, the administration in charge of the government, who generally, realizes that we did not go to the moon and yet never tells anybody about it. So some people would say, well, they committed this crime 35 years ago. What's the big deal? No, they're committing the crime 365 days a year. They're committing the crime today. Because today, if you go to NASA, they have pictures of the moon landing. If you ask the President of the United States, did we land on the moon? The President will say, yes, we did. They're perpetually lying about it, continually lying about it. They're continually affirming that we sent men and they were playing golf on the moon, and landed on the moon in 1969, which is absolutely not true.
Well, when we were talking before, and I was talking about 9/11, and you referred to it as a conspiracy theory, and I just thought to myself, well, I understand why you're saying that. That's okay. But again, it's curious if someone like yourself would look at it maybe speciously, only because once you don't trust the government, you never trust the government again. So you have to always question whatever they're giving you. Be that as it may, though, we do get into the situation about how do you keep a conspiracy quiet. Everybody says that to me when we talk about 9/11, and in a sense, just as you said, it isn't all that hard to do. You think, based on the compartmentalization of people who are doing things at NASA and elsewhere, that nobody really had all the pieces to the puzzle. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. You don't realize, though, what convinced, 1 billion people on the Earth who are watching TV, what convinced them that we were on the moon was those snowy pictures of the lunar module, the flag, and the kind of too bright white and grainy of them floating around on the moon. Once people saw that, and once Walter Cronkite, and they had a subtitle there, live from the moon, okay?
Right.
And we had no reason to doubt them, right? Watergate hadn't happened yet, right? So we had no reason to doubt them. It's kind of a psychological conditioning. Once it's pictured in your mind, that you see something, it's kind of hard to talk yourself or for anyone else to talk, about it over you. Let's say you and I go to our favorite restaurant, right? And you're in town, and I'm like, hey, let me take you out to this great restaurant. It's the best in town. And right before you take a bite into your steak, this cockroach crawls across the steak. Now, no matter what I say about how good the restaurant is, and it just, is an anomaly, that's your impression, right? And nothing I can say about how great the cook is or whatever, you're going to remember that cockroach. And kind of the inverse is true. Once you have this impression that we were on the moon, you're sitting there in TV at home, it says live from the moon, and you have a movement in your heart over it, like, your heart would be disgusted from that cockroach. Well, the opposite is your heart now fills with pride that our country is on the moon. And once that image is established in your heart and in your mind, it's really hard to undo it. Hard to undo that cockroach crawling across your steak, and hard to undo that impression in your mind that we are on the moon. No, I saw it. I was there. It was live on TV. I was there. I mean, there are people who deny the Holocaust. My God, World War II was witnessed by 300 million people. Of course the Holocaust happened. At the same time, the greatest event in human history, landed on the moon, had no independent press coverage. It was on another world. How do we prove that we went to the moon or didn't go to the moon? You have to go to the moon. Who can go to the moon? We can't even go to the moon today. So, what a perfect opportunity to pull the biggest lie. They had us by the proverbial,
short hairs, yes.
Something, and we had no reason to doubt it. And the image of television, and it just you don't realize when the honeymooners were on the air. Television had been around 5-10 years then. People would send in money to, for her to buy her window shades because there was an episode that she didn't have enough money for window shades. People would send her money. 10 years after that, when Gilligan's Island was on the air, the Coast Guard in Hawaii would get calls all the time. Hey, you got to find these people on this island. You know what I mean? They're out there. And, I'm saying that's a very small percentage, but television had this great appeal. And, before I interviewed today, I was just thinking about how, the moon landing, the reason they got away with it is really psychological. It's not really technical, because you can argue technicalities with people who believe we went, and they'll just never accept them. I've talked to scientists, and I've asked them, if you saw Neil Armstrong on live TV confess that we didn't go to the moon, would you believe we did not go to the moon? And they said, no, I still believe. I mean, my God, that's how ingrained it is. And it's just phenomenal. And it's kind of comedic in a way, and sad and profound. The way I look at it is, if they could go to the moon, that would have a certain level of significance to mankind, right? Let's say they could go. Let's say they went all the way to another world, played golf, whatever, that would have a certain level of significance to mankind. Now let's say the other picture is they couldn't go. They lied about it. They embezzled money. They murdered people to make it go down. To me, that is more profound of an event historically than if they had actually gone. You see that? The faking of the moon landing in human nature and in human history is actually more profound of an event than if they had actually gone. The reason was Kennedy set the goal to go to the moon before the end of the decade. He became a martyr. All of his, legislation and goals became kind of, to honor him, let's pass them. And Johnson, figured out we cannot go to the moon, and they decided to fake it. They bit off more than they could chew. Kennedy wasn't a scientist. He was a visionary politician. We orbited the Earth, or the Soviets orbited the Earth, and 3 days later the guy says, hey, let's go to the moon in 8.5 years. He thought, well, it's possible. However, Johnson's administration found out they could not go. It was technologically unfeasible. And basically what that means is you bit off more than you could chew, right? And that is kind of a humbling thing to have to admit. So rather than being humble or honest or telling the truth, we chose the opposite. And I really think we're going to pay the price for it eventually. Another one of the scriptures at the end of the film is by Shakespeare, who says the truth will out. Eventually something's going to happen. We're going to legitimately try to, quote, return to the moon. It's going to kill the entire crew, and we're going to wonder why are we killing the crew to the moon a half a century with a half a century better technology, or either they're going to fake it again and get caught this time. I mean, it's really a sad state of affairs. It just has to do with the human nature, I guess, being afraid. And out of fear, they lied about going to the moon.
Before you think? Well, we'll get to that. But before I go any further, I want to remind folks you're listening to The Grassy Knoll, and with us is Bart Sibrel, a documentary filmmaker. And Bart, the website is moonmovie.com. What all there is there for people to take a look at?
Well, we have our first film, which took 5 years to make. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. It's a DVD you can buy for $30. It has the secret footage in there. You can also see a sample of that footage, as well as samples of the second film, which is called Astronauts Gone Wild. After the creation of the first film, I had the idea, maybe I should just track down some of the astronauts and put a Bible in front of them and ask them to swear on the Bible, whether they walked on the moon or not. And so we, tracked down some of the astronauts, and some of them granted interviews, some of them did not. And in which case we had to track them down at public events or whatever, and ask them to swear on the Bible. And of course we got the famous shot of me asking Buzz Aldrin to swear on the Bible, and I call him a liar and he punches me and all that. That's on there, as well as Ed Mitchell kicking me in the butt, and John Young threatening to hit me, and Mitchell threatening to shoot me, and you see these astronauts who, we catch them in an assortment of lies. I mean, one astronaut says, while he was descending to the moon, the engine was really loud. I mean, it was really loud. And then you actually look at the tape of them, allegedly descending to the moon, and yeah, you're right, there should be, but you don't hear anything. That's because they were in Earth orbit, which meant they were coasting, and they were doing the audio live, and you didn't hear it. So one astronaut says it's very loud when you descend to the moon, the other astronaut says it's completely quiet because of the vacuum of space. One or the other. Then you have Alan Bean. You ask him, did you go through, or what were the effects of going through the Van Allen radiation belt? And he says, oh, we didn't go through it. And I'm like, well, thank you for telling the truth accidentally. You're right, you didn't go through it. The Van Allen radiation belt, for your listeners, is a field of magnetic radiation that is about 1,000 miles above the Earth and extends another 25,000 miles. Every single manned mission in space that is recorded is well below the radiation field. Mercury, Gemini, the Space Shuttle, Skylab, all of that is below the radiation belt, except going to the moon. You'd have to go through the radiation to go to the moon. Well, in 1994, the Space Shuttle went up to its highest altitude, some 365 miles. That would have been about 655 miles or so away from the beginning of the Van Allen radiation belt. And yet, from a distance of 650 some odd miles, they could see the radiation with their eyes closed as sparks of light hitting the retinas of their closed eyes, and they descended to a lower altitude. And then CNN issued this report, and I'm going to read it word for word. The radiation belt surrounding the Earth is more dangerous than previously believed. Okay, people don't realize, what does that mean? Okay, the radiation belt is more dangerous than previously believed. Now, the best study of the radiation belt would be going through it to the moon, wouldn't you think? I mean, how better can you study it when you're in the middle of it for an hour, right? And yet it's more dangerous than when people were inside of it. You're telling me that when people are 650 miles below it, we have more information than we did when we were in the middle of it. How can that be? Well, that's because they weren't in the middle of it. And the reports that they gave were lies about it not being lethal. It more than likely is extremely lethal. So lethal, they descended to a lower altitude, and they reported it as being more dangerous than people believe, which means they'd have to go through it to the moon and back, and that would probably kill them. And that's one of the reasons why they couldn't go to the moon and still cannot go to the moon today, is because of the Van Allen radiation belt.
Before we go any further, I did make an attempt for you to pitch your stuff. we went back into the dialogue. But moonmovie.com, one more time. What titles do you have that are available?
Well, we have A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which is the best film to get in order to see substantial evidence that we did not go to the moon. The second film is Astronauts Gone Wild, where I confront several of the astronauts. The third film is their one and only press conference that they gave, which was in August of 1969. And the three astronauts, and we show a clip of this at moonmovie.com, they look like they're at a funeral for an hour and a half. The expressions on their face are of disgust, despair, and, if I went, 500,000 miles and walked on another world for the first time in human history and came back and got to see my wife and children, you couldn't wipe the smile off my face. And yet, none of them are smiling. They look disgusted and despair. And it's amazing when you really look at it, their behavior is perfectly consistent with a fake moon landing and completely inconsistent with a true moon landing. Then we have Monkey Business, which shows the secret footage that I uncovered in its entirety. We show the best excerpts of it in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and several people asked for all of it. So we show all of it in Monkey Business. We also have a point of view of allegedly orbiting the moon out of the command module. So out the window, you're seeing the moon go by. They're going 6,000 miles an hour, go by, and then all of a sudden the moon stops. You see like a little camera adjustment. It wiggles kind of horizontally left to right. It adjusts a little bit more. A few seconds go by, and then the moon starts going by again. I don't know how you can stop on a dime going 6,000 miles an hour and suddenly, boom, go 6,000 miles an hour again, unless that's a fake moon in the background and you're doing a model of it. And in fact, we have the original slate before, and it says test, and yet NASA edited out the slate and claims that this is real footage of them orbiting the moon. Then we have a shot, allegedly, from the lunar module's still camera, which is kind of mounted on the top outside, and of them walking around the flag. And we have the original slate, and it's dated 5 days before they left. So we have footage of them walking on the moon dated 5 days before they left. Kind of interesting how you can pull that off. Must have a time machine or something, I don't know. And then we just released the Apollo 1 accident report, a 3,500-page document that we bought from the widow of Roger Chaffee, one of the astronauts killed in the Apollo 1 fire. And we scanned every page and color-corrected it, and we released it as a data DVD at moonmovie.com. And we've come to discover that the Apollo 1 fire, which was January 27th, 1967, was probably not an accident. In fact, the dead man's son, Gus Grissom, who was the commander, he had a son, Scott Grissom. And Scott Grissom is a pilot for Federal Express. He flies 747s that are completely, empty with cargo in them. And so, he's a pilot, pretty sharp guy. And it was his dad, who died in the fire, commander of the mission. And he, has went to court 2 or 3 times to prevent the government from disassembling and destroying that command module. The government said they wanted to bury it at sea in memory of them, or disassemble it, use the parts for something else, or whatever. And he's had to go to court to protect that evidence. And he has forensic quality proof that that fire was set deliberately. Now, that's his opinion. He's done more research into Apollo 1 fire than anyone else. Years and years and years of research. His dad was killed. He wants to know why. He is absolutely convinced, as is Gus Grissom's widow, absolutely convinced that the fire was set deliberately. I mean, what more can you say? Now, I want to admit for the record that they believe at this point that we went to the moon. The reason is, Scott told me that, he went fishing with Neil Armstrong. So if the moon landings were fake, he would have heard something. And I said to him, they didn't tell their wives, much less their friends' children, for their own protection. I have this piece of the puzzle. I know for a fact that Apollo 11 did not go to the moon. And he knows for a fact that the Apollo 1 fire was set deliberately. Do you think those two events are related? Of course they're related to one another. The fact is, Gus Grissom was extremely critical of the Apollo program. He said, in his opinion, that they were 10 years away from going to the moon, not 2. One of his last words before he died, they were doing a ground test. The rockets weren't even being fired, and yet they died in a fire. Explain that one. And they couldn't even get the intercom to work. And you know what he said? He said, hey guys, how are we going to get to the moon when we can't talk between 2 buildings? And it was one of the last words he ever said.
Well, what I wanted to ask you, though, was, and I don't want you to give away the keys of the kingdom here, but I was curious as to who would have benefited from his death.
Well, the fact is, Gus Grissom was preparing documentation to give to a member of Congress to, criticize the space program. You see, the higher-ups knew that they could not go to the moon in 1967. They knew that. And they had about 3.5 years or two years to decide whether or not they really wanted to tell the truth that we couldn't go or to fake it. So at that point, the astronauts did not know. So as Gus Grissom was complaining up the chain of command saying we need to fix this and fix this, none of it was being fixed, and he was becoming very frustrated and angry. The reason was the higher-ups knew they were never going to leave Earth orbit, which they could already do, so why bother fixing stuff that we're not going to use? Why waste the money? And they were nearing, a time where they were going to ask the astronauts to cooperate in this fraud. And days before, the guy burned alive, or weeks before, he was so frustrated that he picked a lemon off of a lemon tree. Now, this lemon was huge. It was like the size of a grapefruit. And he clipped the coat hanger in the middle and plunked one in on the lemon and the other, and turned the hook around, and he hung it on the top, the pyramid, the top, the entrance to the moon rocket, the Apollo rocket. And without permission of his supervisors and superiors, he held an impromptu press conference where he invited in the media to take a picture of the lemon hung on the door of the Apollo rocket by the man who was to be the first man to walk on the moon, who was calling the machine a lemon, a piece of junk. Yeah.
Yep.
Then shortly thereafter, that's when he died in an accident. Well, all the other astronauts were like, "Go, Gus, go!" But let's not stand too close; he might be struck by lightning. And had he had some accident after so obviously being blackballed, it probably would have drawn suspicion. So, in my opinion, they killed two other guys along with him to make it look like they weren't singling him out. I've read most of the summary of the 3,500 pages so far, and basically, one of the interesting things about it is they were buckled in when they took their charred bodies out of the spacecraft. They were buckled in. Now, they complained of smelling smoke prior to the fire, and yet were told to sit tight, it's nothing. And the fact that they were still buckled into their safety belts, to me, means that they died before the fire. Because if you see a fire or a spark, in that capsule, the very first thing you're going to do is unbuckle your safety belt to get the heck out of there. The fact that they were buckled in meant that they died before the fire, and lo and behold, traces of cyanide gas were found by the investigative panel. Cyanide gas, of course, is what they use to execute people in the gas chamber. And it's my opinion that they were killed by cyanide gas, and the fire was the means to destroy the evidence of the homicide.
Did that cyanide have occurred any other way from whatever process took place in that capsule?
I suppose their only loophole to that is there are probably extremely, millions of particle traces in plastics or something. Mm-hmm. But I think there was a much higher level than you would find in plastics. So, Gus Grissom also complained of a sour smell prior to the fire. About 1 in 3 people, a little bit more than that, 40% of people can sense the odor of cyanide, and it smells like a sour odor. So if it's strong enough to smell prior to the fire when the guy's still conscious, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then it's a pretty strong amount of cyanide gas. And then you have this great, sword of Damocles to hang over the other astronauts. I mean, you say you don't want to end up like them, do you? Right?
Yep.
Because, in my opinion, Neil Armstrong at that time had incredible integrity and character, and I don't think he would have participated. And I think even if they threatened his life, he wouldn't participate. So they probably threatened more than his life, his children, his wife. I mean, who knows what these people would do? They have stopped at nothing. We know for a fact they didn't go to the moon, and you can only kind of interpret deductively. Why would a man of integrity participate in something like that? The only thing I can think of is if they threatened his family.
Well, first of all, when you talk about the other conspiracies, and of course you mentioned the Holocaust, and I'm sure you're aware of this also, but there is a whole body of people out there and work that say differently about the Holocaust. I mean, you can look at that. You can look at Kennedy's assassination, the moon hoax, 9/11. You can go even back, I guess, to the sinking of the Maine. But you'll always have people that will just as vehemently protest the fact that the government's rendition of the way things went is true. And as you spoke, and we've come across this time and time again, yes, people are threatened to shut up. They either do it by destroying their livelihood, destroying any chance of a pension, or killing them or family members.
Yeah, I can tell you, I'm a zealot. I'm not just, I would say Neil Armstrong has more integrity than me, At the same time, I have zeal for what I believe in. And yet, if someone came to me and said, "Hey, Bart, shut up. talking about the moon landing being a fake or we'll kill your children, I would shut up. You know what I mean? Let God deal with judgment when we're all done with our lives, you know. So, yeah, I mean, as much zeal as I have for this, for the fact that we didn't go to the moon and believing that the truth should come out, even I would succumb to a threat of my family. You know, and these people, you know, unfortunately, they're scoundrels, whoever did it. And if they kill people along the way, even more so.
Well, you know, I'll tell you, now that you've been into this, I'll ask you to take my word on it, but I mean, we've had guests on, one of whom was at Ground Zero the day after, in U.S. Search and Rescue, and described that what we would call men in suits were going up to certain individuals, both in the police and in the fire department, and you can imagine that certain things were said. Some people are coming out. Some of them have a little insurance against what they would do to them, and that is basically they are dying, and there's nothing that can be done to them. So you see, yes, I mean, I'm just giving you an example that even to this day, the treachery of those who would want to keep certain secrets in that manner will stop at nothing, and it works. Let's face it, it works.
Well, it worked temporarily. If you look at history, you know, some of the great thinkers of modern age in the last, 1,000 years, generally, if you study the history of government, take France, for example, and U.S., not too much longer from now, they become corrupt, they become dictatorships, whether they're called that or not, and then there's a rebellion. Then, they wipe the slate clean, and they say, we want reform, and then you get Napoleon, and he's like everyone's friend, and the corporal who became president, and then he becomes corrupt, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's just like this cycle. I mean, take George Washington. When he was fighting, 5,000 American farmers against 25,000 professional soldiers, did he say, oh, it's going great? Oh no, it's going great. Did he lie? No, he didn't. He said, it's 5-1, half my officers are incompetent, half my soldiers don't have shoes, it's winter, help. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he told it the way that it was. He thought if he lied, he would be doing such a disservice to his country. And think about Kennedy. Kennedy in the Bay of Pigs. What did he say the day after? It's my fault. I take full responsibility. And his approval rating was at 85%. I don't know what the current administration's approval rating is, but it's probably below 50. And it's amazing. It's because of secretiveness. I think that if any president, present or future, came forward and said, we did not go to the moon, I accept responsibility, he would be a hero. Or she would be a hero.
Well,
I mean, a hero. And how could you not follow such a person? See, I don't think government can never be trusted again. I think they can't be trusted at the moment. I think it's always possible, to do reform and to clean house. And I think you got to be generous. I think you got to have amnesty. You have to have amnesty for everyone involved in things like this, and forgive and forget. The truth is more important. We're all going to die anyway. So I think I'm optimistic that you can clean house, you can forgive. I mean, I think they just need to come forward, admit it, and move on.
Well, a couple of things. One, I believe the government's famously corrupt. It's unredeemable and has been such progressively since probably Teddy Roosevelt's administration. But be that as it may,
was this the last good or the first bad?
First bad.
Oh, okay.
Teddy Rex Roosevelt? Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, that's the beginning of Pax America. But, again, with the honesty thing, I have to admit that every time an official takes full blame, and I especially think of what I heard when I wasn't thinking in the way I do now, with the situation down in Waco, Texas, and Janet Reno says, I take full responsibility. And that was a pretty high body count. But nothing ever happens to them. They take responsibility, but the other problem is, and I don't think there's any real repercussions, and as you said, I do think it does have a great PR value. I think when you take responsibility, something's going to have to happen to you for retribution, but that never seems to happen to the powers that be.
Well, maybe they're not really taking responsibility. I haven't seen anybody do it.
Well, you can pop off, but I mean, what does that mean? Unless you're held to it, which
well,
never seems to happen.
I think in Kennedy's case, he meant it. I would say it has to do with whether you mean it or not for the few times it is even said. Yeah. Whether they mean it or not.
Well,
I think he probably meant it. I don't know about Janet Reno or whatever.
Well, Kennedy, I think, here's my belief. Kennedy was definitely ambushed and his plan thwarted. And I think he knew he got done, but he went to the American people and he swallowed it. He fell on the sword because to address what took place, for that to be a failure would have been a greater trauma to the American people. So in his case, I think it was a little bit more meritorious because he was covering up a much uglier scenario, if you will. So, I mean, I would say that his avowal was much more legitimate than others we've heard in time to come. But now I want to go back to something, if we could. And I don't know if on your fingertips you can do this, but again, people get livid when you talk about there was no landing on the moon, and they come up with their evidence and their statements. But Bart, if you had to marshal 5 factors that you consider from top to bottom the strongest to support your side that there was no moon landing, could you come up with 5 or as many as you have to combat the naysayers?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to moonmovie.com and go to frequently, or is it top 10? I think it's at moonmovie.com, go to top 10 reasons why we think we didn't go to the moon. My opinion, is the footage. Me being a filmmaker, the photographic evidence that we uncovered of an unedited footage of them faking a shot of being halfway to the moon, to me, in my heart, convinced me that we never left Earth's orbit. Other people, it's the fact that we haven't gone more than 350 miles away from the Earth since 1972. I mean, you gotta wonder. I mean, no one has left Earth's orbit since 1972. No country, not Japan, China, the Soviet Union. You have to wonder if no one has left Earth's orbit since 1972. Why? Why not? That's a big factor. The lunar module itself in the design, what little you can find out about its design, I mean, they're claiming they set in 250 degrees Fahrenheit for up to 3 days at a time and powered air conditioning inside to get the thing down to 72 degrees, and the batteries that they use were basically car batteries. I mean, you go to the desert, you turn on your Cadillac, and turn off the engine and turn on the air conditioning, it might get 20 minutes if you're lucky. And then it's 250 degrees, twice as hot as the desert on Earth. Just that whole lunar module design is really fanciful. The idea that with computer technology less than my Walmart watch, they could somehow blast off of the moon's surface and perfectly calculate a docking sequence at 6,000 miles an hour of a, Volkswagen-sized spacecraft orbiting the moon. With the computers back then, that is just really hard to understand. Just the fact that the Soviets were much more advanced, and did the first animal, first man, first woman, first, and yet never attempted to send a man to the moon. And then you have just the fact that the entire event, or the perception of the event, was completely controlled by the federal government, by Richard Nixon. The television camera was controlled by the government. It wasn't like, it was on Earth or in World War II. There was nothing. I mean, it could have been in someone's basement, backyard, a television studio. Who knows? I mean, we assumed it was from the moon. Just that in and of itself, that the entire perception of it was 100% controlled by the government. I mean, that is dangerous right there. And then, I mean, what do you think? What to you convinced you the most that we did not go to the moon?
I'll be honest with you. I know that the government would be fully capable and willing to do anything, and so the moon situation is something that I don't discount. Now there are techie types, and I had asked Harry, by the way, to level some questions so that I could give them to you in lieu of him being here. But he didn't get to do that. So, I mean, some of the technical questions that he'd like to address will not be aired here. One of the things I will say, and that is, and as you well know, You have people who claim, and of course this always happens no matter what, whether they're your eyewitnesses or the adversary's eyewitnesses. You have people that swear that they saw the LEM on the moon, that the LEM can still be seen.
No, it's utter nonsense.
Okay, why
According
is that?
to, that's like frogs give you warts. Ask NASA. I mean, anybody can call up NASA or email NASA. Can you see objects on the moon? No, you cannot. According to NASA, no Earth-based telescope is powerful enough to see any man-made objects left on the moon. Also, according to NASA, the Hubble telescope is too powerful to see any man-made objects on the moon. I wish it were that easy.
Okay.
If it were that easy, then we could easily prove that they didn't go to the moon. But the technology does not exist, according to NASA, to see whether or not there are any man-made objects on the moon. That's the one way to prove it. I mean, we have the relative latitude and longitude of lunar landscapes to do it. Now, Japan, about 5 years ago, did send a probe to the moon that had 5 different cameras on it to potentially take photographs of the alleged landing sites. And what a coincidence, as soon as they achieved lunar orbit, all 5 of their cameras simultaneously malfunctioned. And those Japanese can't make a good camera.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw some other at you, because there's people going to be listening to this that are going to be squirming in their chairs, wishing they had asked questions. So I'm going to have to start asking you some questions, okay?
Sure.
All right. The one thing I don't understand is that after all this time, and I've even talked to my captain pilot buddy, who isn't really versed on this particular matter, and that is the Van Allen belt. If it is all-encompassing and is as dangerous as it's stated to be, then that's it. Show's over. It didn't happen. But there's still that murkiness around that, which I'm a little bit confounded by as to why we really don't know what the potential of that is. So would you address the Van Allen belt issue? Is it 360?
The guy discovered the Van Allen radiation belt, Dr. James Van Allen. He said in his initial report there was a 50% chance of a fatality going through the Van Allen radiation belt in a spacecraft. 50% chance of dying. Now, I may also say, after Kennedy set the goal to go to the moon, he recanted and said, no, it's not that bad. May I also add that von Braun said, before Kennedy said let's go to the moon, he said that in order to reach the moon in a single rocket, it would have to weigh 800,000 tons. Be taller than the Empire State Building. Now, the one they used to allegedly go to the moon, I think it was something like 6,500 tons. So 6,500 tons and 800,000 tons is something like a difference of 30,000%.
But Bart, is it possible that von Braun was dealing with the materials they had at the time, not knowing that they might come
No, not at all. The fuels they use today and then in rockets are exactly the same.
But what about the composition of the aircraft as well?
No, nothing has really changed in rocket technology. The fuels are the same. All these, latest space guys that are using to get up to 60 miles, they're using virtually the exact same fuels. Gasoline, kerosene, and liquid oxygen combined together.
I'm just wondering if they had lighter materials from which to make rockets, given the fact that we have all these composites now.
Well, if they use lighter materials, then you're not as well protected from radiation. So that's the problem. Even the space shuttle, when they got within 650 miles of the Van Allen radiation belt, felt that it was not safe. So, and they have better shielding than the Apollo spacecraft used.
Mm-hmm.
I think you'd have to have lead around the humans in order to reach the moon. And if you did that, then of course it would be too heavy to get off the ground. So it's kind of a catch-22 there.
What about the possibility of being picked up on radar back in 1969? I mean, didn't that blip come across literally other people's radar screens?
No. Even the Soviets, our main adversary, did not have the capability of tracking deep spacecraft until 1972. All their radar was dedicated to incoming missiles, and they didn't have a way to triangulate spacecraft until 1972. And at that very same time, the U.S. canceled the next 3 moon missions. Once they had the ability to be tracked, that's when they abruptly canceled the rest of Apollo.
Okay, so that in the timeline can be documented that there was a concurrence there. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, let's see. One of the things that I feel was kind of interesting when you asked me why do I believe it. I don't know that I do. I'm very, very open, and I'm open, to be ping-ponged. But one of the things I thought was interesting was the shadows cast in less than parallel directions on the moon.
Yeah, the sun is around 92 million miles away, and you're on the moon with no atmosphere. So according to NASA, the moon is 20 times brighter than a desert on Earth at noon. So you don't need flashes for your camera. You don't need light. And the astronauts themselves commented that the shadows on the moon were dark as pitch. And, of course, the shadows would run parallel with one another. And a few of the photographs, they intersect, meaning, sometimes they intersect at as much as 90 degrees. Now, the only way that could happen is if the light source was really close, so close that my would be cast in different directions to our proximity of the light, which means they're not on the moon. If any shadows in any photograph do not run parallel, they're not on the moon, because they're claiming it was lit solely by sunlight, and sunlight will only cast parallel shadows. Artificial lighting or studio lighting would cast shadows that intersect.
Or how about multiple lighting sources?
That too, one of the two. Either more than one light source or a light source that is so close that our proximity to it would throw the shadows in different directions.
All right, we also had that issue, which I thought was a little bit indicting, about looking at the moon out supposedly through the portal. At the Earth. I'm sorry, at the Earth.
Yeah, what did you think of that footage? What was your opinion of that footage?
Well, it is curious with whatever that thing is up in the upper left-hand corner. What was that?
Well, that's a work light. Basically, to the listeners, and again, you can go to moonmovie.com and click on Monkey Business Sample. And basically, the shot that we found them faking was allegedly of being halfway to the moon. So if you can imagine your TV screen mostly black with a little blue tennis ball-sized Earth in the middle of it. Allegedly, 2 or 3 days into the flight, they're halfway to the moon. They only have one window that faces the Earth, and the lens of the camera is right to the glass of the window to shoot that tiny Earth floating in space, right? Well, we have the unedited version. Now, they only aired about 10 seconds of the very best of the shot. We have the version that shows them in the spacecraft, and the camera is not up against the glass. It's actually at the very back of the spacecraft, 10 to 15 feet away from the window. And all the lights are turned off in the spacecraft, and all the windows are blocked from sunlight entering, all of which they talk about because they thought the conversations would be edited out. And several feet in front of the camera is a circular window, which is filled by the Earth in Earth orbit. However, what you're seeing is actually a depiction of the Earth in space. It's kind of hard to describe, but basically you're seeing a section of the Earth outside of the circular window. And the blackness around the circular window in Earth orbit appears to be the blackness of space. So what appears to be the Earth floating in space is really a part of the Earth outside of a circular window in Earth orbit. It's super clever, the way that they do it. But when we remember when the arm gets in front of the window?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, either that's the arm of God, right? And we have the first photograph of God, or it's the window. And the fact is, it's the window. And that means they are faking being halfway to the moon. That's what it means. So they're faking being halfway to the moon. If they really went to the moon, why would they be faking any of it? If they're faking being halfway, it's because they couldn't go halfway. And all the missions had identical equipment. So if your Volkswagen Bug can't go 500 miles an hour, neither can mine, which means all of the missions were fake, because Apollo 11 is fake, and they all had the same equipment.
I'm going to ask you to extrapolate, if you will, and of course this isn't based on any work you've done, I'm just asking your opinion. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in time. We may not even be around for this, but I'm wondering, with all this talk about manned trips to Mars, is this how does this all fit in?
Well, that's not going to happen until they, quote, return to the moon. The current administration said several interesting things about going to the moon. Number one, they said, maybe when we get to the moon, we'll discover certain things in the soil that we can use as fuel. Okay. Well, I mean, we were there 6 times.
Right.
I mean, if there's any fuel sources in the dirt, I think we would know by now. Then the administration also says that before we can return to the moon, we need to learn how to protect the astronauts from radiation. Well, just do it the same way you guys so successfully did it the last time you went to the moon. Then the administration said, going to the moon is a logical first step to Mars and beyond. That's why we need to go to the moon again. Well, wait a minute. If it's a logical first step, we've already done it. We already know. We've already learned our lessons, right? We don't need to go 7 times to learn our lessons, hopefully, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that he says we need to return to the moon as a logical first step means if we, quote, return, we'll be going for the first time. I mean, it's said right there.
But the bottom
in the
line,
administration's own words.
Well, the bottom line would be, and of course you can wonder this too, why they didn't fake other episodes also throughout the decades. I mean, if they faked it in 69 through the early 70s, why couldn't they, with even better techniques nowadays, and of course, as you go through the decades, why not fake a couple more?
Well, they don't need to fake anything at the moment. They can orbit the Earth. You can orbit the Earth, and the space shuttle is real, and probes, unmanned probes, are more than likely real. So they don't have any need to fake anything. Going to the moon, they had to fake it because they can't go to the moon.
Oh no, but I'm saying why not fake another? We just went to the moon again, and of course they would have better.
Well, they might. If they are serious about, quote, returning to the moon in 2020, they're either going to go and the crew's going to die, or they're going to fake it. Those are their two choices.
All right. One more time, Bart, please tell people your website and all that can be gotten there.
Yes, moonmovie.com, and you can get Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, Astronauts Gone Wild, Post-Flight Press Conference, and Monkey Business, as well as the Apollo 1 Congressional Report. You can get all 4 of the first films for $15 each if you buy them as a set instead of $30 each, and it's at moonmovie.com.
And if you don't mind, as we are running out of time, there may come a moment in the next month or so where I'd like you to have it come on and you can go debate Harry. I think that would be interesting. Are you up for that?
Who's Harry?
Harry's my partner, who's the tech head, was in the defense
absolutely.
system.
Has he seen Funny Thing Happened?
I sent him the Word doc, but he's not seen it. I've not seen him. I'm going to hand that off to him after this.
Yeah, he's going to watch the movie then.
Yes, he will.
Yeah, I would love to debate him after he's seen A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon.
All right, Bart Sibrel, moonmovie.com is the website. Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. This is DVD plus others. Thank you very much, Bart. I'll be in touch because I'd like that to happen.
No problem.
All right, brother. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay, bye now.